Now look, Word in Your Ear comes to you at least once a week in the form of a podcast, a videocast, or a thing so new it has no name. And it's free. All we ask is that you subscribe, like, and wherever possible, leave a comment. And if you feel like getting further involved, you can become a Patreon supporter, which could mean you're inviting us to rifle through your record collection, are inviting you to join us for our very special Friday night quiz, and all of us feeling the sum of human happiness has been increased. Details at patreon.com/wordinyourear. And now on with the show.
Welcome to another Word in Your Ear. The Smiths has to be one of the great compelling stories of the 80s, and there's a glorious moment in this new memoir where the bassist and the drummer look at each other, palms upturned, and each say, where did it all go right? The book's called The Drums, and welcome aboard Mike Joyce. Mike, it's lovely to see you.
Cheers. Thanks, Mark. Hi,
Terrific.
Dave.
So I suppose our first question would be, what's taken you so... You could have written this book a long time ago, really, but what took you so long to get around to it?
Well, I've been asked many times over the years to commit my thoughts to word, to paper, and I had no desire to, really. I just felt as though I'd let other people do that. My kind of experience is upstairs. And I like it there. I like to kind of delve into some of those fantastic moments of my life and career, and that's fine by me. So I had absolutely no wish to write a book at all. And then sometimes I think maybe it'd be a good idea, and that'd last about 30 seconds, and then that'd go over the years. And then I got a call a couple of years ago from an author called Jennifer Otter Bickerdike. And it was through my agent, and she spoke to me on the phone, and she said, I really want to do a book with you. And I said, well, yeah, I've heard this before. And I said, look, there's so many kind of areas of that experience that I don't want to revisit. And she said, you don't have to. And I said, oh, really? Don't I? And she said, no, why should you? Just write the book you want to write. And I said, well, the expectation would be a kind of a touche kind of thing of what's been written before by other people. And I said, and she said, no, just what about the experience, the fantastic experience that you had of being in the band? And I said, well, yeah, that sounds pretty good. So on that basis, we just started having a few conversations and a few Zooms and that kind of thing. And she came up to the house. And it felt really good, rather than being a debilitating exercise of having to revisit some areas that weren't so celebratory. All we did was talk about the great things that happen. And she said, because the thing is, I've not read Johnny's book or Morrissey's book. I just didn't feel the need to, really. I mean, some people got in touch with me and said, whoa,
You must have been given the highlights by other people.
And I just thought, well, that's only to be expected. That's no surprise there. But in terms of the celebration, she said she didn't see anything in those books because she'd read them both. And she said, the beauty of what you had, the wonderful experience has never been discussed or kind of spoken about from somebody actually in situ. You get people, obviously, Smiths fans, people that I've seen in the band over the years saying, oh yeah, fantastic, what a great band, loved them, loved the music, loved the words of Morrissey, blah, 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 loved Johnny Marr. And she said, but nobody's really kind of tried to put into words just how incredible some of those experiences were from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So that was enough for me to then say, okay, let's go with this. And then the more that we went on, the more that I really liked it, because Jen's a massive Smiths fan. And she was saying, this is great, Mike. This is because she said, I've never heard people talk about being in the Smiths in this way. So that's why we carried on with it. And that's why we're here today.
Right.
Well, no, that's good, because it is mostly, as you say, a celebratory thing. You touch on the various moments of friction, and I'm sure we'll probably touch on them later. But traditionally, we in these interviews we go back, don't we, Dave, to the record playing equipment at home. Can you remember what the record playing equipment was when you grew up? And can you remember what kind of records you first remember hearing?
Well, it was anything in the house, because I didn't have any records, and it was an old Bush kind of flip top, record player that my brother and my sister used to play tunes downstairs, and I took it upstairs, and I just had whatever they had there. There was Leo Sayer. There was what else was there was all manner of kind of stuff that I wouldn't Beach Boys, not the kind of stuff that I'd be into. I wanted to play my drums to music, and that was it really. I wasn't really asked about genre or style or content. I could hear that there were drums on there, and I wanted to play along to those.
All right, so it was immediately you were listening to drums on these records.
I was, yeah. It was.
How funny. I wonder why.
I don't know. Well, I mean, it was. I think, probably because I wanted to be a drummer. I mean, I think, the two. It wasn't like I was just listening to the drums on records and thinking, "Wow, this is great. I want to be a drummer." That came after I went to see Buzzcocks, and that's when the record player started coming upstairs. Because prior to that, the record player had been downstairs. But once I got my little drum kit up in the bedroom, record player came upstairs.
Right, so you write about finding your first drum kit with your mother. Yeah. And your heart set on having a kit like John Maher's from the Buzzcocks, but you couldn't afford it.
Well, not really, but she managed to find some money to get it, and I think, I talk about that in the book about the accident I had when I was 9, which when I had the last rites and I suffered from epilepsy, and it was touch and go whether I was going to kind of pull through. And after that, being the youngest of 5 children and being the spoiled baby, then after that, it was the preciousness went through the roof, and as I mentioned in the book, when it was like, can I have the moon? What would you like, full, half, or it was really, she would have done, and I mean, obviously mothers do anyway. She would have bought me the moon if she could, and I was so set on this drum kit. I think it was a kind of way to give me something. In terms of after the shit that I went through when I had the accident. So, and I think, I don't know, I'd probably do exactly the same. If it was my kids that were asking for something like that, especially with that kind of level of desperation that I think I probably conveyed to her about not wanting a drum kit, having to have a drum kit.
And it had to be a red one, didn't it?
Well, it did, because that's when I saw Buzzcocks. And I mean, I was really taken by the fact that they weren't, well, not anti-punk. It's just that punk rock to me was kind of aggression and fighting and spitting and coarseness and abrasion and fuckless and anger, and everything seemed so pent up and kind of like a fight to music. That's what it felt like to me. And with Buzzcocks, that was the complete opposite. I just saw joy.
They're so soft-centred, weren't they?
Yeah, but again, a break. Well, I mean, when you think about obviously tracks like Orgasm Addict and Oh Shit and some of the heavier tracks, but there was a beauty to it. It just seemed so kind of not just melodic. It did seem more melodic than a lot of the records, a lot of the bands that I'd heard, a lot of punk bands. But watching John Maher and the way that he moved on that kit. And the kit, it obviously had lights on it, but it was red, and the red and the gold of the cymbals. And I just thought, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. So that's why I wanted a red kit. The red Premier kits were out of even my mum's league. So this Beverly kit, because we went in asking for a Premier kit, and I didn't really know anything other apart from Premier kits, because I just watched and saw what John Maher had, and I was like, I want that one. And then
I love the idea of your one toms, and it's got to be red. These are important things,
regardless of the make. It's like, these have got great, 3-ply shells. I'm like, is it red?
Yes.
And that was the prerequisite of wanting that, it had to be red, because I wanted it to be John Maher. Just like, how many guitarists, bass players, drummer, whatever, want, that Ampeg sound, or want a Fender, or whatever their hero is playing. That's what they want to do. They want to try and be that person. That's exactly the same with me.
So your devotion to the Buzzcocks is so fantastic. You almost stalked them actually at one point, don't you? Don't you turn up at one of them's home?
Yeah, I didn't almost. I did stalk them. I used to hang around New Hormones, which was a management company, in Newton Street in Manchester. When I was about 15, I think, and just take an afternoon off school, and just used to walk up and down the road for hours on end, hoping to catch a glimpse of one of them, because I knew the address. And then one of the I remember Steve Diggle coming down the steps outside, and I kind of quickened my pace and I was like, oh, hello, kind of as though I just bumped into him as I was walking past when I'd been there for hours. And I did. I found out where Pete Shelley lived, and went round to his house and knocked on the door, very excited. And then this guy answered, and he said, "What do you want?" I said, "Is Pete in?" And he said, "No, fuck off." And I went, "Oh, okay." So I fucked off. I found out where because they had another management company offices, on Oxford Road in Manchester. That was prior to the Newton Street place that they had. And again, I kind of went down there. Absolutely, because it actually said on the back of Another Music in a Different Kitchen, it said New Hormones. I think it's 184 Oxford Road. And I went down there, and I was with my mate Foxy, and it was a block of terraces, and it was like, oh, here we go, yeah, 182, and then it stopped, and I was like, are you kidding? And after that there was a pub, there was some waste ground, then a pub, and then it just had some more buildings, and I was absolutely furious because I just thought, I can't believe that they've played a trick on people by doing that. And then I met up with Richard Boone many years later. Of course, he worked at Rough Trade, and I collared him about this, and I said, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "Oh no, it was in the basement of 182." And I said, "Well, why didn't you put that? Why didn't you put what do you call it, 182B or something?"
I love the way you were still cross about it.
Yeah, well, I'm still frustrated. Well, like I said, they were my heroes, right. You can imagine what it was like was it 1990 when I got a call from Steve Garvey to come and play with them.
So look, tell us the circumstances of how you joined the Smiths. Just tell us how you got involved in the group, and then tell us about that first rehearsal. They're beautifully described in the book.
Well, it was a friend of mine, Pete Hope, that I was living with at the time. He knew Johnny, and he said to me, a mate of his is looking for a drummer. And I said, oh, right, okay. Anyway, got the cassette, had a listen, very intrigued, because I never heard anything like that before. And it was arranged that we went to a place in Manchester on Terrace Street, a little studio there where they had a setup, Johnny and Morrissey and Dale, the original bass player. And I went down there and met Johnny, and I'd seen Johnny a few times. He used to work in a shop called X Clothes in Manchester, and I remember going in there, and he looked so cool, man. And I was kind of slightly in awe, really. I was a bit scared because I picked up a jumper thinking, "Cool, this looks great." And then I kind of looked at them and I thought, no, I best not I'll put that back on the shelf because I was a bit too embarrassed in case they started sniggering and laughing at me. But it was very kind of very cool and very very sweet at this rehearsal. Morrissey, not so. He just he didn't say a word, really. He just kind of stood there. Well, he didn't just stand there. He was just walking up and down, very kind of furtive glances, and Dale was okay, and then had a little play with him, and really enjoyed it. It was.
So Johnny hadn't explained who Morrissey was. You had no indication of what.
Well, he wasn't
expect.
Morrissey at this point, was he? I think you say in the book he was Steve, wasn't he?
That's Steve. Right, David. Well, I mean, it was. I didn't even know he was from Stretford, so it was just Steve, a lad, the singer. and Johnny the guitarist and Dale the bass player. That's all I knew. You know, I didn't know because there wasn't anything else to know about them really, in terms of whether, you know, who they played with before or what their history was. I was more interested in the present at that moment and to find out whether I liked how it kind of transposed in a live situation rather than just on cassette. And I was really intrigued by what I heard. I mean, Johnny's guitar playing was outrageous even then, you know, when he was, 18 or something. And it was just, I'd never heard a guitarist play like that.
It's so original, isn't it, his style? It's absolutely extraordinary. I don't know where it comes from.
No, well, I mean, you know, you can kind of, you know, whether it's James Honeyman Scott or, you know, there's elements of you know, tiny little bits of something in there. But I think it's because of his the fact that he doesn't have one style, and you know, I mean, it can go from kind of punk like Miserable Lie in those early days to Tough Little Children. You know, it wasn't like a punk guitarist or a folk guitarist or a rock guitarist. He was a guitarist, and his writing would be so diverse. And that's what really intrigued me, is that, you know, because bands that I'd been in prior to that were punk bands. So it was, you know, faster, and the fastest. And those were the three kind of tempos that I worked with. So to hear music of this with such quality and such depth and such originality and such for me again, you know, kind of music I never heard before was a massive plus point, but and also a really kind of engaging lad as well.
So are we to believe that the songs were constructed by the three of you, or Johnny writing a basic riff and the three of you recording that and then giving that to Morrissey separately for him to add a melody and a lyric? Was that roughly how it came about? Yeah, pretty much, yeah. I think... So the three of you would get together and Johnny would say, let's try this out and record it. You'd have no idea what that song would turn out like. Just give it to Morrissey. Yeah.
I think sometimes, I mean, later on, Johnny would put an idea on cassette and then give that to Morrissey, and then Morrissey would go away and write some words for it. But what actually kind of, how it ended up, I mean, obviously it was the same riff-ish, how that ended up musically between myself and Andy and Johnny would change slightly. I know that, you know, I mean, every songwriter that I've ever worked with has not a definite, well, sometimes, but 99% of the time, they have an idea of how it should sound, because obviously they're writing a riff and they've got an idea of how things should sound. Well, sometimes that wouldn't be the case, and sometimes kind of what I'd bring to the table would change it slightly. And the thing is, I would riff a lot with Johnny, rather than, you know, the traditional rhythm section where the bass and the drums would be locked tight, and then Johnny would play the riff over the top. I remember Johnny kind of mentioning it in the fact that it was a little bit more like the Stones with Charlie and Keith kind of riffing off each other, and Wyman kind of playing his little song over the top. And that was as close as I think as a kind of an analogy that I can think of, really, because Andy's bass lines were songs in themselves. I mean, you listen to something, I mean, I've never done it, but listen to, because I can isolate it in my mind, but in isolation, that bass line on, say, Hand in Glove, it's all over the place. It's all over the place.
They're beautiful. Melodies, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I'd riff with Johnny, because Johnny was, apart from his brilliant melodies, he was an incredibly percussive player. And I found that really interesting. And I do it still. The only other time that I've heard somebody do it to that extent is Budgie from the Banshees with McGeoch when he was working with them. That kind of, the rhythm. And that's why I kind of picked out certain rhythms in the guitar and enhanced those and exaggerated those and accentuated those. And then in turn, sometimes Morrissey would then kind of accentuate that, because he was hearing more of a more exaggerated version of that riff that Johnny had played, because of course there was no drums with that.
Can you remember your feelings when he came back with things like, I don't know, This Charming Man or whatever, and the three of you suddenly heard a different version, if you like, of the song that you'd recorded.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it was. I don't think I ever. Well, I mean, of course, it sounded great. That was one of the great things about the Smiths, is that, you know, certain ideas that came along with other bands that I've worked with prior to that and since that, some ideas just get shelved. It's like, that's not really working. With the Smiths, that never seemed to happen. It was just anytime Johnny would pick up a guitar and play a riff, it sounded incredible. And then, you know, Andy's bass line on top of that, and then me playing along with these two incredibly talented people, it would always sound great. And I think This Charming Man, you know, it was something. I remember us working on it, because I remember I was trying to play. I mean, obviously, it's a Motowny thing, I would have thought, more than anything. And with Andy's bass line, he plays a dum 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 da dum. Now, the end of that phrase, da dum, I went with that initially, so I was like bum ja bum ja bum ba ja ba bum, and I started playing that along. And when we were playing it along, it sounded too regimented. It didn't swing very much, but I really wanted to lock in with that bat 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 bat. I mean, it's a kind of Bo Diddley kind of thing, which is kind of rife over a lot of Smith songs, underlying that. And then we changed it slightly, because I said it just sounds too kind of robotic and too stiff. So I just clipped that last bass drum on that riff, and because Andy's playing that bass line anyway. Because I've listened, a drummer didn't get in touch with me. I was speaking to him, and there was a kit there, and he played that riff, but played it with the double bass at the end, bass drum. And I said, it doesn't do that. And he said, it does. I've listened to the record. And I said, no, it doesn't. I said, it sounds like it does, because Andy's playing that, and I should be doing that, but I'm not. But it sounds quite loose in that regard. Yeah. It's not so kind of regimented. So I was listening to things like that rather than, isn't this a great record? Until we actually listened to it. And I think, obviously the first time that happened was hand in glove, because prior to that, we'd just been in a rehearsal room and you know, blasting it away, and sitting behind a kit isn't kind of indicative of how a record's going to sound, trust me. And I couldn't really hear the words, you know, and then there was just one guitar. And then when we went in to record Hand in Glove, and I listened to that in its entirety for the first time, now that's when I just went, God, good Lord.
Yeah, it's
Can you remember when you first heard a Smiths record on the radio?
No. In all honesty, no, I can't. But it must have been Hand in Glove.
Right.
I think that the first time that it was, I can't. I must admit, no, I can't really. I wish I could say I did, but
it's brilliantly described, that bit where this euphoria of the four of you realising what you've got. But it's also a contrast with you again talking about, well, he's now Morrissey, Steve, and you talk about how him being kind of aloof. And what was it you said? His articulacy was both his strength and his Achilles heel. It was a really interesting line. What did you mean by that? I mean, I can guess, but explain that.
Well, it's very difficult to explain, because I don't want to make it sound as though he was, you know, just sitting in a cardboard box, peeping over the top, going like, I'm ready for the vocals now. You know, I mean, he's a very funny guy. You know, he's very, very Manc in his humour, very dark and very funny. A very funny guy. But I think those elements of his life and elements of his communication, and not skills, but his communication, that I felt as though me and him just, you know, we didn't need to communicate really outside of our work. And I mentioned it in the book, you know, I mean, I had a set of mates that I used to go out with all the time and hang out with, and you know, very outgoing character I am, and you know, and with Morrissey not being an outgoing character, I respected that. I didn't want to kind of dive in and delve in and prod and cajole and annoy somebody who it was clearly they didn't really want to go there. So I felt as though I'll just keep our communication to a minimum, because I felt as though that's what he wanted. Whether it was or not, I've no idea. I mean, obviously later on we started to kind of lighten up with each other a bit more and kind of felt more comfortable with each other. But again, that when I talk about the Achilles heel, I think it's because people, upon meeting him, just feel as though he was being not rude, but just being more kind of more insular than they wanted, really, and not being.
Yeah, there's an amazing description of Andy Rourke being travelling back, I think, after a rehearsal, or something, on a bus with him, and they go this long journey in a bus, and Morrissey doesn't say a single word. Andy Rourke's thrown by it.
Yeah, well, that's it. I think he said there's 1,760 lampposts from when he got on the bus to where he got off. It was just painful. And I think, and that's why I kind of accepted that. I just thought, well, you know, I don't want to because I also felt as though I was kind of slightly beneath Morrissey in terms of his, not just articulacy, but his knowledge and his. I'm trying to say, you know, it's like when people say, "Oh, they're really posh, those people." You know, what the hell does that mean? You know, and I'm trying to articulate. I'm sure Will Self would have a fantastic word for it, the correct word, but I'm struggling to find it. And I just felt as though, but when I say beneath him, I don't mean that either.
But is that aloofness that you talk about in the book? And maybe that's just part of some of the essential nature of what it takes to be a singer. Because at one point you say that singers need to feel that they're the most important person in the room. And I thought that was a really, really good point, and I'm sure that's true. So what else did you learn about what it takes to be the singer and the front man?
I think, all I want to do is make people feel comfortable in their working environment, and also in a social aspect. I just, you know, if somebody's kind of sitting there feeling a bit shy, I want to bring them into the fold rather than thinking, well, you know, they're obviously...
Well, let me guess, Morrissey doesn't. He doesn't suffer from that. I think it's a really important point.
It is.
Yeah, you strike me as, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, you're a people pleaser, and he's not. Is that right?
Absolutely. Nail, head. Yes. Because I think that's what it is. And I think, you know, Morrissey doesn't feel the need to be engaging, and he doesn't feel the need to draw people into his world. And that's kind of how I felt. And again, I was perfectly happy with that. I didn't kind of hold it like a begrudgingly kind of like, well, that's what you want to be like, then fair enough. You know, I didn't feel that. I just thought, whatever it takes, you know, and I don't want to encroach into your world, because obviously you don't want to bring me in. Whether you want to bring me in and can't bring me in is another matter. I don't know. But I suppose it's respect. For the individual.
Were there times then when you, and possibly Andy too, were sitting there and looking at him and feeling, not uncomfortable, but just sort of thrown slightly by the way he presented himself and presented the group? You know, the gladioli, the hearing aid and all that stuff. Was that something discussed with you? Was it just something that he did and you went along with?
The latter. I remember the first gig that Andy ever played with us at Manhattan Sound in Manchester. Towards the end of the set, Morrissey had pockets full of confetti and started throwing them around the room. And obviously didn't mention anything to us about it, but it was fantastic. It just brought a smile to everyone's face. And it was like going into a grotto at Christmas time when you're with the kids. You know, you see the adults walking around going, wow, wow, wow. You know, it just brought a smile to the whole proceedings. And then with the flowers, again, the austerity of the hacienda and, you know, that kind of, you know, flowers. A great quote from Morrissey when asked about why the flowers, he said, well, it's better than socks. Exactly. I mean, it's just a way to kind of to have like a garnish of kind of beauty of nature, and those things with the hearing aid, the "Marry Me" on his t-shirt, all those things never discussed, and likewise lyrically, never discussed. You know, the obvious ones, obviously, Headmaster Ritual, Meter's Murder, Barbara Begins at Home. I Won't Share You. All these tracks are pretty obvious what's going down, but some of the other less obvious ones, there's no way I was going to ask him, hey, what's this for? What do you mean by this? I don't think anybody's ever asked Morrissey what he means by his words. Those are his words and the preciousness of that. So in terms
did Johnny ask him when he came in? Did Johnny ask him about what some of the songs meant, or did you just accept that was the song and you were going to record it?
You'll have to ask Johnny. As far as I'm concerned, I never did, and I'm pretty certain Andy never did either, because it's so personal. It's not like wearing a new jacket. Going, oh, that's nice. Where'd you get that from? That's cool. Oh, is it wool? Oh, yeah. Wow, I like the lapels. Oh, nice buttons. It wasn't it was something so internal and so personal and so heavyweight that I wouldn't even dream of asking somebody, about words that they've written. As with any artist that I've worked with, regardless of who it was, but Morrissey or anybody, I've never asked anybody about what those words are about, because firstly, I don't want to put them in a corner, and secondly, I don't think a lot of these artists would actually tell you what they're about. And I think sometimes they're not about anything. And sometimes they're about something that's incredibly and deeply personal that I don't think they're going to really want to go there to kind of convey what they're meaning down. Sorry, Mark?
So you described the meeting when it's Johnny that decided the group was no more.
Yeah.
Was that a shock to you?
Yes. Yes, yeah. I think when bands split up, there's normally obviously is it because it's run its course? Very seldom. I think there's kind of incidents or kind of situations that arise prior to a split where there's a head-to-head, or there's a disagreement, or there's something that happens that's kind of irrevocably a breakdown in communication between band members. With this, I didn't see it coming. Well, none of us did, and I think that's what was. So it wasn't just a shock to me. It wasn't like me going, what, hey, and Andy going, oh right, yeah, kind of saw that coming. Or Morrissey, the first we knew about it, and the first that we could it wasn't even mentioned at any point of like, I'm sick of this, I can't handle this anymore, I need a break, or it's driving me mad, or anything like that. It was just when we sat down in Geales fish and chip bar in London, and Johnny just said, I'm leaving the band.
So that was as much of a surprise to Morrissey as it was to you? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
How long was the conversation following that announcement?
Short. I mean, it was a statement of intent. It wasn't, okay, so what should we do? How are we going to deal with this? Because my first reaction was, let's just do another album. Let's just do one more album, and then kind of, if you want to kind of jack it in. I suppose that's the worst thing I could have said to Johnny at the time, but I wasn't thinking about what's the best thing to say here, because I was in deep shock, because what was my life and the beauty that we'd kind of given to people and experienced ourselves. It just seemed as though. How can you just throw away all this incredible experiences that we're having and the beauty that we're creating from nothing? So, it didn't even, it wasn't even a matter of why. That wasn't even discussed.
Really? Well, from our long experience, Dave and mine, of interviewing bands, we always feel the same thing, which is that bands don't talk to each other. They don't discuss things, and therefore you get situations where, just like this one, where some kind of resentment grows and grows and grows and just explodes, because that could have maybe been resolved if he'd said earlier on, by the way, I don't feel that happy about this.
Yeah, I think, well, you can use the analogy as well, in relationships too, people just say, why can't you just say to your partner that you're not happy with them? Well, you don't sometimes. And in a band, you just don't. I do think now. I think Johnny's kind of. I mean, again, I've not read his book, so I don't know whether he touches on that. But I think the idea of him kind of just getting to a point where he couldn't contain the pressure of doing it anymore, and I think. Also, and again, maybe this, I don't know, maybe this discuss this, and maybe I'm just speaking out of order, I don't know. Maybe it's because he felt as though he'd done what he needed to do in the Smiths. And it's not such a matter of like, that's it, I can't handle you anymore, and I can't stand that bass line, and you're driving me mad, your drums are shit, I'm going to work with somebody else. Maybe it was just the fact that he'd done what he needed to do in the Smiths. I mean, when you look at it's strange, that kind of beginning, middle and end, because it has that, obviously, because we split up in terms of getting together. First album, great, and then Meets Murder, yeah, wow, people kind of loving that, and then Queen is Dead, and then a couple of compilation albums, and then Strange Ways. Wow, I mean, is there anything else left to cover? And, people saying, what would it have been like if the Smiths would have carried on? Well, would that next album been a stinker? Would it have been even better than Strange Ways? Nobody will ever know. I think it probably would have been better than Strange Ways, certainly more different than Strange Ways. But maybe, and again, maybe I'm talking out of line again, I don't know, but maybe Johnny had kind of had that beginning, middle and end in terms of what he'd brought to the table with the Smiths and wanted to work with other artists in different styles and genres, which of course he did.
And it's also so hard for you, having wanted it to go on, which you can understand. But I suppose you could argue that if you've got a compact, whatever it is, 4-year catalogue like that, that's got nothing that really lets it down, then that in some ways contributed to the whole legacy of the Smiths being just expanding.
Of course, yeah, most definitely. I think that, to finish, when people say better to finish on a high and, to burn brightly. There was no kind of, oh dear, the crowds are getting smaller. Oh dear, the album's gone in at 48.
That's right.
Well, absolutely, because that's the life of most bands, isn't it? Really.
So when it's kind of thrust upon you, but this is that thing, isn't it, where you don't really know whether the next album might have gone to number one, and the next album might have gone to number one, and the next album might have gone to number one. We'll never know. I can't imagine it because of Johnny's kind of prolific writing and Morrissey's great wordsmithery. I've never used that word before. Wordsmithery.
I like it.
I can't imagine it being all of a sudden a precipitous kind of like, oh my God, what have they done?
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine that happening in any kind of scenario. But in terms of that beginning, middle and end, the body of work that we did create between the four of us was, pretty outstanding.
Well, it's not really mentioned in the book, as you said earlier on. It's mostly about the good times. You had the falling out over the royalties, and there was a court case and all that. But how do you feel about? And this isn't mentioned either, but we have to ask you: how do you feel about Morrissey today and the things he's done and said that in some ways seem to have really tainted people's memories of those records? I mean, how do you feel about that personally?
I don't know Morrissey. I know going like we were saying at the start of this, where, it was this lad from Stretford called Steve. And that's how I knew him. Then during the Smiths, I knew Morrissey. And then kind of post-Smiths, and I mean, again, we're talking 40 years. I don't know Morrissey. I don't know him. And he doesn't know me. 40 years is a long time without kind of being in close contact with somebody and having an opinion on them. There's so many people talking about the fact that he's they can't listen to the Smiths, and people defending that and saying, look, Morrissey has an opinion on something. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't listen to the records. That shouldn't, they're separating the art from the artist, all that kind of speak that's going around. As far as I'm concerned, he just seemed very angry. That's what I see. I see a very angry man. And frustrated, and sometimes I think obviously,
why is he angry?
I think a lot of this is Mark. I think a lot of this has come from that For Britain badge thing. Now, again, I've seen some things written about the woman that kind of ran that. I don't even know whether it's still going, but staunch vegetarian, or maybe she's vegan. I don't know. Absolutely, right up on animal rights, right up on other things that are probably close to Morrissey. Whether some of the other things that party stood for, well, I know I certainly don't agree with it, but again, I'm not too sure whether he went in there knowing all of the facts. I'm standing up for him here, but again, I could be completely wrong. Maybe he did, and maybe he is incredibly right wing in terms of what his views are. I don't know. I've never seen an interview where somebody sits down with him and they actually discuss these things. So it's very difficult to know. Like I said, he's very contrary, and he always has been. I think he was probably contrary when he was about 12, and never mind when he's in his 60s.
That's true. There's never any debate. It's just a kind of pronouncement on his part, isn't it?
No, I know, because, the thing is, he's saying he's not racist. That's what he says. Well, I never saw anything racist from him, when I was working with him, and that's all I can go off, really. Whether he is now, I don't know. I've no idea. He says things that, I've read and I've thought, what? Really? Nah, I'm not having that. But that's my opinion. But I've never I've never seen him sit down with somebody and actually discuss these issues, and for it to be kind of in the black and white in terms of what his because nobody's ever asked him about the For Britain badge thing. Nobody's ever said to him, why did you do that? And if he says, well, I agree with all the policies, then I think that would kind of settle the debate, really, in terms of whether you think he's got right wing leanings or not.
Well, if you need to be reminded of all the tremendous, glorious achievements and ascent of the Smiths, this is the book. It's a brilliant book, Mike. Very enjoyable. It's called The Drums. And, if you were going to be a part of any group, the Smiths, what a one to pick. Fantastic. So nice to talk to you.